Only in white girl. I love the girl like you or type. Like I come up to you. I am two like different. We can start from first two, three, and let's see.
It's okay, thank you. I have a lot of friends.
No, be best friend. You are very special. So much money I can buy. Whatever you want. I don't want anything for you.
I don't care about money.
I can do anything for you. You can do that too.
No, but I can do everything for myself.
Why you not?
I'm not racist. No.
Then why you not anti-black? What
the hell are you talking about? If someone is not into you...
No, listen to me. You are not into me. If any white guy approach you, you give your number to him.
No,
if any
I
black guy
don't
approach
do
you,
that. I'm not interested. I want to be on my own. Bro. Yo. Did you hear this shit? There's no way.
Okay. What's going on there?
Well, you see, with the deal with a lot of migrants is that they come from very closed societies or very restricted societies, right? So when they come to a when they enter a Western society and they see when they see freedom, right? Freedom, people dressing freely as they wish, people interacting with each other, like there's no taboos of interaction between men and women, and all of that. They go crazy. They don't know how to handle that freedom. So that's because their culture is not priming them for such a radical kind of freedom that's found in Christian societies, or historically Christian societies. So they go out of their minds. They can't control their impulses when they see that, right? So that's why this phenomenon exists, is because these people, like in my society, for example, there is a taboo, like not everybody can go up to a girl and ask for their number without any fear of getting some physical retaliation or something, right? So if an Indian guy walks up to an Indian girl on the street and asks for a phone number, chances are that that woman's brother or somebody will come up and beat the heck out of that guy. And that's because not because of any sense of modesty or anything, but it's because a sense of this honor culture, right? It's people, parents. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's because you're not supposed to break barriers between certain castes or certain religions and all of that. If you do that, like there are many instances of, if there are inter-religious marriages, then the parents themselves end up killing that both the boy and the girl, right? This happens, and you can see this kind of like I've heard that this kind of thing has also entered UK, where there is a huge Pakistani and Indian population, like because of the migrant influx and all of that. So they end up, doing all of these grisly murders on their own children, just because, it also happens with Christian converts to Christianity, right? Like if a Muslim converts to Christianity, uh, then like the parents end up killing that person. So
is this like the honor killings or something?
yeah. So this does not this exists a lot in Eastern cultures, and you can get a sense of like how much taboo there is between the genders in Eastern cultures. So when 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 single um, adult males migrate into Western cultures, and they see that there is no such taboo, that like people, like there exists hookup culture and all of that, like people are free to talk to one another and so on. They go crazy because they have not been taught how to temper their passions, right? They are not been taught how to control their passions for such freedom.
But do you don't you think that people in Western society have sort of these problems too? These not being able to control like
Well, yeah,
certain
I mean,
impulses.
of course, Shannon, of course, there's like catcalling and all of that in Western cultures, but it
Mhm.
doesn't usually, like, violence doesn't follow rejection. You get what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Like, if you
Mhm.
go to a bar and if you like threats of violence, right? If you go to
Mhm.
a bar and you approach a woman and she says, "Go away, creep," the best you can do is, move on to your next target, right? That's like the usual way how people deal with that, but
Mhm.
it doesn't say like there's no such thing like people don't threaten to kill another person on or when they are rejected. You get what
Right.
I'm saying? So it's so like the violence, like if there is like I said, if hookup culture and all of that exists in the West, but the violence has been tempered, like the violence has been taken away from the equation to a
Yeah.
Right.
large extent. I'm right.
Like
Yeah.
India is the
Yeah.
home of yoga, but does India have yoga pants common in the cities?
Nope.
Because
Only in
that's part of their culture that you wouldn't be walking around with like that, right?
yeah, I mean, it's like this is very much recommended. Like if any tourists are visiting India, especially for females, I wouldn't recommend them to wear Western clothing because Western clothing, like the average Indian guy goes crazy when he sees a Western
Like
clothes.
Mumbai,
So,
they don't
yeah,
wear
I
yoga
mean
pants
anywhere,
in
even
the ritzy little, areas.
they do wear that. It's in the upper caste society, upper not caste, but like economically upper class societies. They are much more liberalized over there. But in larger, like if you are going to all of these other places, which is far more numerous, then then it's not recommended that you wear Western clothing. It's better to wear Indian clothing, so people don't
Wear
go
the
crazy.
the sari. Sort said
Sari
they
or
got to wear the
the
sari.
Better
sari, all the or the
better to
salwar
be
kameez,
safe than sorry,
like
right?
the yeah, better to be sari than
Safe than sorry. Yeah.
yeah,
Better to be sorry than safe, right?
yeah,
You and then you have within that dynamic, you have you're talking about an environment in which uh, people are thrust into a new environment where they see someone wearing what would be considered very revealing nightgown or night material with a marriage
yeah,
situation. They see him walking around and they don't understand in their culture that means that person's really wild and ready to go for anybody apparently in their mind, right?
yeah,
Don't understand
yeah,
that because they're saying everything they ever saw was very very modestly dressed with you know with lots of uh,
yeah.
material,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there still the practice of like after a you know in the in sort of the Brahmic tradition, of I don't know how much you know about this, but in the Brahmic tradition, I had learned that the woman when she becomes a widow, she will basically end her life through. You
Yeah,
know.
that's called Sati.
Mhm,
That's so in Hindu tradition, the dead body is burned, not buried, right?
mhm,
So it's burned on a lot of wooden blocks.
mhm,
So what they used to do until the British ended that practice in the 19th century. It's not found today. I mean, it could be there, but it's not widespread.
mhm,
So the widow would uh, jump onto that fire
mhm,
and sacrifice herself,
mhm,
because it was thought that her life ended with her man's. And
mhm,
child marriage was also common. You would see 50-year-old, 60-year-old men
mhm.
marrying prepubescent girls.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the British, when they arrived, along with some Hindu reformers, to give credit to them,
Mhm,
they formed an alliance and ended this practice. They
mhm.
made it illegal. So if anybody was found doing that, they would be instantly hung. You know.
Right. Why do you think the Mughals, after, you know, um, having, um, historical and, control over India for so long, do you think that some of their because the Mughals were Muslim, right? That some of their practices, their view of ethics, which you know, you might say some of it is very, you know, has some similarities to Christianity as far as maybe say recognizing the victim or the scapegoat and stuff like that. Do you think anything from the Mughals sort of trickled down to the wider Indian society besides like architecture and say maybe language like Urdu, and stuff like that? Is there some? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think there could be Islamic influences of modesty that had impacted Indian civilization. Because if you see some of these very, very ancient Indian temples, they're pretty graphic. Like if you see their architecture, I'm sure you must have come across some of them when you search for it on the internet. They're
Mhm,
pretty graphic. They depict all sorts of you know sexual deviancy,
mhm,
right? And all of that on its outer architectural designs.
mhm,
So like it's the entire, like, top to bottom. It's like
mhm,
lined up with, like, if you Google a temple, it's called Khajuraho Temple,
mhm,
somewhere in North India, I guess.
mhm,
You could see, like, you would see some pretty shocking things over there.
mhm,
And so like I think, like, this is just my speculation. I think after the arrival of the Muslim invaders, and after them getting integrated into the culture, you could say that their influence of female modesty did end up having some sort of it was integrated into the culture.
mhm.
So
Yeah.
like in the olden, like before, in the pre-Islamic times, many, like, it was very common for Indian women to walk bare chested, out in the open without any covering at all.
Mhm,
So you can see the ancient, the architect, the archaeological evidence for that.
mhm,
So, yeah, I mean, and as far as, like, if you're asking also, like, why didn't the Mughals stop all of these practices, and why weren't they passionate about all of that? That's because when the British came, and not that this was official British policy, but
mhm,
when the East India Company came, a lot of missionaries came along with them,
mhm,
right?
mhm, mhm,
And these missionaries were pretty independent. They often went up against the British administration, and they actually stood up for the Indian people a lot of the time, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And they had they, it seemed they had more stake in the Indian people than the British administrators, you know, the bureaucrats who were governing India. So the Mughals did not have that kind of missionary zeal,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
They weren't that much concerned about, you know, societal reform. They were
Mm-hmm.
concerned about they prioritized their territorial
Expansion.
expansion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's interesting that you bring up. Sorry, David. I'm not trying to keep on going, uh, but it's interesting that you mentioned the thing about the women, because I remember learning about this kingdom called Travancore, which is in
yeah,
southern India. Yeah, that was
southern
run by.
India.
Yeah, it was run by. It was there's a king, but the women tend to run that society, sort of like the
Yeah,
background
there are a lot
background.
of not just that, there are a lot of matriarchal societies in India.
Hmm.
If you, especially if you go to the northeast side,
Hmm.
like the inheritance is decided by who is the, like, the daughter receives the inheritance, not the son.
Hmm. Hmm.
So you can see a lot of matriarchal societies in India over there. That's why you have, like, in the Hindu religion, there is a Shakti worship uh, uh, stream, you know,
Hmm.
sect
Hmm.
in Hindi in the Hindu religions, where
Hmm.
where they worship the chaotic feminine, you know, like
Hmm.
the ones who Gloria Steinem and all of these second third wave feminists
Yeah.
glorify a lot.
Yeah.
And you can see them, you know, taking that thing and, you know, in trying to influence the wider Western culture with it.
Hmm.
So so they see that as a kind of, you know, patriarchy is seen as a kind of perversion of the natural order. And
Hmm.
if you ask these orientalists or feminists what the natural order is, they
Hmm.
will point to these societies in
Hmm.
India
Hmm.
where it's matriarchal, and they will
Yeah.
say that's the natural order.
Yeah.
So
That's
the
interesting. Yeah, it's true.
yeah,
It's true because if you look at the West in a lot of celebrities who are female, even some males, right? They'll a lot of times. This is what I was talking about, trying to get back to this idea of why why so many in the West are so fascinated with pre-Christian religions, and particularly when you look at like wanting to go back to being following like Celtic Druid religion, right? Or the Scandin the Scandinavian religions, in the
yeah,
runes, right?
the
Or
Vikings.
yeah, or you follow, I want, voodoo and its various different, you know, um, denominations in Brazil and Cuba and you know, Louisiana, what have you, right? And then you look at India too. There's the same thing because you talked about Shakti, and then I'm thinking about Kali, right? The
Yeah, I
goddess
remember
of.
that movie, Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom,
Hmm.
where so where there's it shows like some the villain is taking out the heart
Hmm.
of a guy and
Hmm.
offering to Shakti, the
Hmm.
goddess Shakti. So that actually happened. They used to sacrifice people to the feminine deities.
Right.
You can still find these temples. There's a temple called uh, I forgot the name. It's in Orissa,
Hmm.
where there used to be the widespread human sacrifices over there. Although the modern academics try to deny that.
Yeah. Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but you know, the one thing that really flies in their face is that they still find headless bodies of young girls and
Hmm.
boys over there, you know, where some of these creepy, you know, shady cult members offer sacrifice to these they still continue sacrifice in the, you know, very discreet manner, you know, away from the law and everyone.
Right.
So this was widespread, this human sacrifice and worship of feminine deity, worship of nature, and all of that these are all connected to each other.
And so why do you think there is a desire to return to that sort of pre-Christian worldview and worship when they know that there's a undercurrent, say, of extreme violence there, right? That they
Well,
want to worship the female counterpart or what have you, the feminine, or whatever, even if it is the masculine. They want to return to that pre-Christian era without really fully embracing what it means to be a part of that religion, right? Or what it means to be
right.
a part of that that cosmos, that worldview, right? Does that make what I'm saying make sense?
Right, right. You're. I mean, you're asking the question why don't they want to fully return to that, like genuinely, like return to that authentic way of
Mm-hmm.
doing things back then? Why do they go only halfway? And
Mm-hmm.
that's because they don't have the physical capability. They don't have the this is the thing, Shannon. Like, you have to understand, Western countries for centuries, even if there were like twisted puritanical forms of Christianities and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
it's been saturated with the Christian view of the world. It's been saturated with Christian ethics, right? So
Mm-hmm.
if like, yeah, like, if you like if you want to crucify somebody in the public square, I don't think even like your greatest haters would want that for you, right?
Yeah.
They would rather have you imprisoned, like the former president, and make fun about it on the internet. Like, that's
Mm-hmm.
their idea of brutality.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is like a biological hardwiring as well as psychological, right? It's not
Mm-hmm.
just that it's in the mind. Like, it's not just that we can't do it because we don't have the will. It's also because we are biologically unable to do so, right? We
Mm-hmm.
don't, like, if we see blood, we'll probably puke out on the street, like on
Yeah.
the side of the street. If we see
Right.
blood,
Yeah.
it's like
It's
so
repelling.
repugnant to, yeah,
Yeah.
it's repelling, it's repugnant. But you
Mm-hmm.
can't say the same for some cannibalistic societies, right?
Mm-hmm.
They
Mm-hmm.
thrive on that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like the hardwiring that goes on, like,
Yeah.
and the desire to go back there, like, of course there is a desire to try to attempt to go back to that kind of thing that
Mm-hmm.
exists because of a lot of things, right? Like I mentioned, puritanical Christian culture, right,
Mm-hmm.
where the women feel subjugated because of all of these restrictions on their way of clothing and all of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? And also because of a lot of man-made social engineering as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not every, like, there's a mix. It's a mix of organic and you know
Outside.
willful outside external forces and all of that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So so yeah, like, it's mimetic envy towards Christianity for bringing it, because Christianity has brought such order, and it's brought such, cultural cohesion and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
uh it's like a mimetic envy,
Mm-hmm.
a swinging back and swinging to, away, the pendulum swinging away, that kind of thing,
Mm-hmm.
where they think like, uh and not only like like, not only this happens, not only with just the feminists, it also happens from a masculine perspective as well.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you would often see some of these pagan larpers on the internet saying that Christianity has weakened men and cuckolded men. They called it cuckianity or something like that,
Mm-hmm.
and that they see it as a kind of like weakening of masculinity.
Mm-hmm.
So if you ask them what true masculinity looked like, they would often point to Odin and Thor and all of that. So,
Mm-hmm.
and Zeus and all of that. So you see that's what might makes right. That's what true masculinity means, right?
Right.
So
Right.
so so they conveniently leave out uh, the many episodes of these masculine deities being pretty sexually degenerate in their
Mm-hmm.
mythological stories.
Right. Yeah. Zeus turning into a bull to
Yeah.
Europa, and yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
don't, you know, they don't really
Yeah.
understand the myths, man. You know.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah. They don't
Yeah.
understand that this is like turning into wolves and all of that. This is just BS.
Yeah.
But the reason he turns into a wolf is because they cannot portray a human being, back in those times. They had to otherize the human, they had to make him sort of like a hybrid
Hmm.
animal human thing so that they can justify the actions which are animalistic, right? So Girard said that there was sexual assault that took place in that text,
Hmm.
so they had to dress it up in a monstrous they had to make Zeus transform into a wolf so
Hmm.
that him magically transforming into a beast will justify the beastly actions that occurred. And even the
Hmm.
beastly action, like the that occurred, that also was dressed up, so with certain symbols and all of that, so it doesn't look, carnal.
Like
It
what it
doesn't look
really is.
what it really is. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah, man.
Now, who is the higher rank in the hierarchy? The economic elite of today in India, or the let's say you have a millionaire economic elite person who is of a lower class, and then you have a super higher class who is a lot poorer than that person. How does that social interaction work?
Well, there are both, right? In If you're talking about in the broader national sense, then of course it's the economic elites that are on the top. And if you're talking about more rural sense, then it's the local, then it's the uh, upper caste people
But
who
how does
are
that
recommended.
interact on the micro scale between, let's say you have a middle class person of
Well, let's
high
say
class,
let
and then you have a rich or much wealthier guy of a lower caste. How are those like which one's going to trump the other in terms of the pecking order of social deference and everything?
Well, there are multiple ways this plays out. Let's say you have a millionaire lower caste person, right? So that person may not be attacked publicly or anything, but there will be gossiping behind the scenes. There will be there will be envy in abundance, right? Like lots of people are going to feel jealous about that person,
Hmm.
and not going to publicly praise him in the local neighborhoods and so on. So because of the law that exists, or the constitution that exists, outright violent discrimination does not take place that much, but it's more sublimated, right? It occurs in a more underhanded fashion, where people they don't kill that person, that millionaire lower caste person, but
Hmm.
they will smear him and do all
Hmm.
kinds of
Or like push him,
gossip.
like shun him or something. Put him
Yeah.
in a like a black sheep.
Yeah.
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 Even if they have money.
Right. Even if they
Wow.
have money. Yeah.
Wow.
So
That tells you how strong
there's
that
this weird
culture
thing,
is.
like there's this weird scenario that often you can see it in a lot of places, where the upper caste person is doing is doing a job that's not worthy of his status, right? He's
Hmm.
selling tea on the street side, he's selling food on the streets or something like that,
Hmm.
and that person might look down upon a lower caste rich person and justify it, saying, well, at least I'm not the same caste as that person. you know
Hmm. Hmm.
like
Hmm.
eh,
Yeah.
so yeah, so and it does not, I don't mean to say like it happens only from, it's like only one direction, right? Where the upper caste people, like the envy also flows from the, don't get me wrong, it also flows from the lower caste towards the upper caste as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
It flows both ways.
Is
Yeah.
there a
So
correlation between the highest caste and highest income brackets? Does that overlap pretty nicely still, or no?
well, the prime minister of India is a lower caste person.
Mm-hmm.
How many
So
ranks lower is he? How many? How many levels are there?
I haven't looked too deeply into it.
I think there's 5, isn't there? There's
Yeah.
the Brahmins, the
There's
priests.
white belt, yellow belt, brown belt,
No,
and black belt.
Yeah.
no,
Yeah,
there's the
it's
priests.
probably the yellow belt or brown
Yeah,
belt.
He's
yeah,
brown belt.
Yeah.
yeah. It's the Brahmins, the kings, right? The priests, the kings, the warriors, the merchant class, and then the untouchables.
Is that it? I thought there was like 100 of them. Is there a subcaste?
No,
of
no.
these people?
There's like at 5, 6 at the most,
Yeah.
I guess.
Mhm.
Not more than that.
So that's that. Now that's the thing, though.
So the Brahmins
Okay.
are probably academics now, right? Scholars.
That's what I was. Now that's exactly what I was gonna say, right? If they're not making, so if a Brahmin who's of the class of Brahmin who's at the top, right? So he has that status, that sort of noble status, right? The aristocratic status, but he don't have no money, but he'll still be respected over, say the
Rich
lower
merchant.
caste person, yeah, or the merchant, because he comes from that aristocratic family, right? So
Like
merit doesn't really play a part in any of this.
like there's another weird situation. So in India, there like now it's very much weakened, but there is a big communist party, right? The Communist Party of India. And then you have the lower caste party. There are multiple parties in India, like not just Democrats and Republics. There are like literally hundreds and 200s of them, even thousands, who knows. In like you have the Communist Party and you have the lower caste party, right? So the lower caste party can't stand the Communist Party. Why? Because the Communist parties are filled with Brahmins, educated Brahmins, Brahmin atheists. Even though they're supposed to be like for against social discrimination and all of
But
that, they're still
it's the
like
same as populist and Antifa kids and stuff, right? Yeah.
that
Like
dynamic is
MAGA
there.
populist people versus Antifa rich kids that are
Yeah.
sons of trust fund babies that are communists in America.
So because of the introduction of capitalism and all of these things, there's like all of these weird overlaps, weird situations like where it's not like really black and white, right? It's
And that
very
probably
complicated.
paralyzes a lot of the cultural function with mimetic rivalry, right? Because you have
Yeah.
scrambled the hierarchy that was mediated
But that's why
Hinduism.
that's why you have all of these Hindu nationalists and not only Hindu nationalists, but also Hindu Indian academics who are many of them are in the West, by the way. So they blame the colonial powers. That's the real reason why they blame the colonial powers, is because they disrupted the societal cohesion at the micro scale. Though they won't say it upfront, like that, they will play the Marxist game of which they borrowed from the from the West. They will play that game, and they will go along with the anti-colonialism and all of that. But the real reason is because they disrupted Indian cohesion, right? They think of pre-British India as very social, social well ordered, socially well ordered, and uh, all of these barriers were there, and there were uh, least amount of upward mobility and all of that. Everybody were properly doing their roles. I would say the same exists in Japan to a certain extent as well. But yeah, so
Yeah,
that's that like
both are,
this.
yeah, they seem to be, both cultures seem to be very homogenous, right?
Yeah, I mean, in like Japan is much more well ordered, and that's because it had a much more direct influence of capitalism and all of that. It's like especially post-war period. Like you could probably hypothesize, probably imagine that if India was beaten in a major war, this India would have turned out very similar to Japan, right? Because of the Marshall Plan and all of that. So who knows? I'm just saying.
Yeah.
And I think there's something about how Japan was integrated into the Western framework at the time in which radio and TV were ascendant, which those types of media would
Yeah.
be very conducive to adapt to Japan's image-based system and acoustic-based system versus when India encounters British colonialism, it's in the form of the printed text of Britain coming in with its printed text form of thinking, which is isolated individualism, which is much more of a cultural upheaval for an acoustic society based on audio and visual, you know what I mean? Versus now you're isolating text and the way in which texts have a way of altering the culture into what I'm saying is the text driven British society kind of clashed, I think, and created more chaos than the TV and audio based American society that was still print dominant. It's still text infused too, but it was able to transmit. Because if you look at it, Japan, what does Japan do? They get really big into electronic media. They're making TVs and video games right after World War II is concluded, right? So they jump on board the electronic age and they kind of ride into that world, which seems to be able to mesh with their cultural fertile ground of the environment in which they came from, which was not, phonetic text, in the way in which the British mind comes into India. I haven't fleshed that idea out very well, but I just feel
No,
I feel like there's something there,
Yeah.
and I don't have enough words to.
No, that your what you said has merit because I'm just imagining myself as an illiterate Indian farmer or an illiterate Japanese farmer, which would have the most effect on me? Would a book with just text on it, because I can't read, right? I
Yeah.
can't read a foreign spec. But if I have a television set where people are moving, they have gestures and all of that, the story is playing out right before their eyes. I mean, if we see a foreign movie, I think we could make out 50 to 70% of that movie, even if we don't know the language, because we know the gestures, we know how the story is going, we know love stories, violence and all of that.
Yeah.
So, so the Japanese were much more, the American way of reaching out to the Japanese was much more in that regards, right? And you can see that especially in the 60s and 70s, where the Japanese got into anime, started making anime and all of that. They were influenced by Walt Disney cartoons that the Americans were showing them, and all of these things. So the British text version, that was very limited in its approach, and the American media is much more on a broad scale. Like you have radio.
I think it's just more tribal friendly. I think
Yeah.
electric media was more tribal friendly, and
Yeah.
Print media creates a much more jarring individualism that is hard for a tribal society to kind of mesh well with. It just scrambles a lot
Right.
of, and it doesn't mean one is good or the other. I think there's a lot of problems with the printed framework that we're still dealing with to this day. And in some sense, the digital media online world has elevated all of these different things, the audio of the podcast, the visual of the live stream, and the ubiquitous text of tweets and Facebook posts, and the image of the Instagram. All of these media are all coming out together, but it's this it's a very very interesting experience to see how this is shaping our society. And I was thinking about the other day that the word, when we talk about language in and of itself must always root itself back into something that is real in the real world of the body. Language is signs and symbols we use as a kind of like a currency, a medium of exchange, right? Language helps us refer to things in a shorthand way. And when it always has to root back to something that is embodied, incarnated. And I think about when we think about the notion of what is the word of God, the idea of a person being the language of God is interesting. That Jesus, in some sense, language is like money. Money is a medium of exchange. Money has no value other than what it refers to, right? And the sense that when we talk about the word, Jesus is the money of God. Jesus is the currency by which God and man interact, so to speak. Does that make sense? It's the medium of exchange between God and man. I think that's a very interesting thing. And, you know, all language has to be ultimately incarnational for it to be language. Otherwise, we don't understand what we're saying. It's just every word we say roots back into something that is embodied in us.
Yeah.
A gesture.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. I mean, you know, I don't know if this has anything to, if this relates to what you're saying, but you know, going back to India and thinking about India and Japan, you know, one of the things that they still, you know, that is common between them as far as language and art, you know, and being able to perform, they both have very strong and very ancient forms of, you know, acting, like opera, or you know, uh, playing, you know, whatever, right? So like in India, you know, I was talking, you know, me and you guys were talking, and I was telling Surit about, you know, the Kathakali in southern India, you know, which is a play, you know, and then you talk about like no theater or kabuki in Japan, you know, which has the same, you know, underlying currents. Like they speak to sort of the mythology, the national, you know, some of the national heroes, you know, the myths, the gods and stuff like that. And, you know, that's presented to the community or to the village or to the, you know, whatever. And you know, there is a way that I think language and, you know, signs and stuff are displayed, you know, in acting. They carry, you know, a very different meaning and weight, right? Because there's all this signage and stuff that you're doing with your hands and facial expressions and stuff like that that carry you know, meaning for those societies, you know, and even like from a Western perspective, you can't even really understand all the sort of expressions because they don't have, you know, they don't have, that hasn't been, you know, that's not the way we communicate, right? So, you know, it is um you know, I think you know, Japan of course did pick up Western values and stuff like that, you know, in the 20th century, you know, but then Japan also took, you know, cultural cues from India, you know, being that, you know, Buddhism and forms of, you know, tantric Buddhism and stuff like that was flowing from India to the east, you know, by way of China and Korea and everything. So, you know, I mean, yeah, it's I'm not sure if that relates to what you're saying, but yeah, I do think language and the way we, you know, transmit our ideas through through signs and language is really important from a, you know, cultural
Right.
context. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like what I think what you were saying there is that if you see a lot of these pre-text, uh, you know, like the operatic performance arts that you mentioned, Shannon, is that all of these things are more visual, right?
Mhm,
They're not overtly intellectual or anything like that.
mhm,
So like I mean, in the West, like there was a certain phase right around the time when the schism occurred. I wouldn't say it was because of the schism or anything like that. It was just something that was there. Is that there began to be an overemphasis on scholasticism, right?
mhm, mhm,
On on intellectual things,
mhm,
and there was a break. There was a, you know, like I don't know how to it's not like this Catholic Church was scholastic or the Eastern Church was mystical or whatever. I would say there's much more nuance to that, because even in Catholicism or in the Orthodox churches, you would see that within those churches there are splits between scholastic and mysticism, and so that was like a breakup that occurred, and I think that happened much to the detriment of the West, where they lost a lot of valuable things. So in these ancient civilization, all of these things were intertwined, right? But because of a certain kind of thinking that started to take place, where it was like David calls it left brain right brain division, and because of that kind of approach, a lot of valuable things were lost in there, and including how we approached media, right? So the media, the stories we began to tell were overtly, hyper focused on the text rather than in the performance of that story. So the theater and all of that, those began to be totally separate from all of these religious intellectual discussions. So I think the print revolution occurred with that thing in mind, right? With that thing in the background, that kind of separation in the background, where like, yeah, sure, like now you had access to Bibles, like common person had access to the Bible everywhere, but they didn't have the access to the approved interpretations of it, or the approved, how you participated in that revelation that was in the Bible. Like the Catholic churches and the Orthodox churches had liturgies where you can, where you sort of like an actor in a movie, but like once you have that separation of scholasticism and mysticism and all of that, once you had the print revolution and the exposure of the text to the entire masses, then you begin to have a little bit chaotic, participation in churches, where social cohesion was not there anymore, and you had thousands of denominations in the Protestant movement, and all of that. So I think Marshall McLuhan comments on this as well, and he looks upon it as like as a setback rather than a progression.
Yeah, Marshall McLuhan says about the printed word in the book Understanding Media. Socially, the typographic extension of man brought in nationalism, industrialism, mass markets, and universal literacy and education. For print presented an image of repeatable precision that inspired totally new forms of extending social energies. Print released great psychic and social energies in the Renaissance, as today in Japan or Russia, by breaking the individual out of the traditional group while providing a model of how to add individual to individual in massive agglomeration of power. The same spirit of private enterprise that emboldened authors and artists to cultivate self-expression led other men to create giant corporations, both military and commercial. Perhaps the most significant of the gifts of typography to man is that of detachment and non-involvement, the power to act without reacting. Science since the Renaissance has exalted this gift, which has become an embarrassment in the electric age, in which all people are involved in all others at all times. Does that sound familiar? Where we're at? He wrote this a long time before where we're at. The very word disinterested, expressing the loftiest detachment and ethical integrity of typographic man, has in the past decade been increasingly used to mean he couldn't care less. The same integrity indicated by the term disinterested as a mark of the scientific and scholarly temper of a literate and enlightened society is now increasingly repudiated as specialization, and fragmentation of knowledge and sensibility. The fragmenting and analytic power of the printed word in our psychic lives gave us that disassociation of sensibility, which in the arts and literature has been a top priority for elimination in every program of reform in taste and knowledge. In the implosion of the electric age, the separation of thought and feeling has come to seem as strange as the departmentalization of knowledge in schools and universities. Yet it was precisely the power to separate thought and feeling, to be able to act without reacting, that split literate man out of the tribal world of close family bonds and private and social life.
I wonder what how McLuhan would have reacted to this when anybody says facts don't care about your feelings.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you see, like this separation of the experiential part of your life from the education part of your life, right? So what participatory knowledge does, as opposed to just getting knowledge off of a one-way direction, from a book or something, right? From the printed text. The difference is that from a participatory thing, you know how to integrate your emotions along with the knowledge, right? You know how to integrate your senses, your bodily senses to that knowledge. Whereas if you go through a book, you'll get only half of the knowledge. You won't know how to. So I think this is why a great example is, a lot of people, like, even though we have the social media rising, like nowadays everybody is on social media, everybody is invested in social media, you still get this feeling that people don't really know the effects of social media, right? What effect it is having on you, like how is it conditioning you in radical different ways, like even you don't know about it, right? So I think that's like a great indication of how, categorized textual information tends to affect you as opposed to participatory experience, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've never heard of this Marshall McLuhan. His
Yeah,
news.
he's pretty interesting. He's actually a Catholic. He was a Catholic scholar,
Okay.
pretty radical, like Girard, and
Yeah.
also very very difficult to understand.
Yeah.
Like, just like Girard. Yeah.
Yeah. The word, the words, sometimes they
Yeah.
don't. I'm like, I can't follow, man.
Yeah.
I can't follow.
Well, I mean, the concept itself is not too difficult, right? The medium is the
He writes,
message.
Marshall McLuhan writes his works like, he writes it like literature, and so it's got a poetic lens to it, which poetry can be hard for me to understand too, so he kind of writes with a little bit of literary style. I tell you what he says about a little bit about radio here, since I have a background in radio. He says radio provides a speed up of information that also causes acceleration in other media. It certainly contracts the world to village size and creates insatiable village tastes for gossip, rumor, and personal malice. But while radio contracts the world to village dimensions, it hasn't the effect of homogenizing the village quarters. Quite the contrary. In India, where radio is the supreme form of communication, there are more than a dozen official languages and the same number of official radio networks. The effect of radio as a reviver of archaism and ancient memories is not limited to Hitler's Germany. So he's saying that radio helped to create the rise of the Nazi Party with its return to like
Also,
ancient tribal.
nationalism.
like the experience of radio, like creates a different extension of man that returns it to certain things like ancient memories. Ireland, Scotland, and Wales have undergone resurgence of their ancient tongues since the coming of radio. And the Israeli present and the Israeli present an even more extreme instance of linguistic revival. They now speak a language which has been dead in books for centuries. Radio is not only a mighty awakener of archaic memories, forces, and animosities, but a decentralizing, pluralistic force, as is really the case with all electric power and media. Radio,
Yeah.
once a form of group listening that emptied churches, has reverted to private individual uses since TV. The teenager withdraws from the TV group to his private radio. Isn't that interesting? It's true. You know, you're watching TV with your friends and you go off into your, I mean, in that time in which he's writing this, you would go back maybe into your bedroom and listen to the radio.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
and people listen to the radio in the car, you know, which is like a private gossip transmission kind of thing. And podcasts are kind of a newer form of
I
radio.
think
Right?
I think back then, people also, families also got together to listen to the radio. Back then, I mean, we're talking about 50s, 60s time. You know, they would have radio dramas back then, and they would have sports events like that was big on the radio back then.
Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. It also, you know, I think it also allows for, you know, I mean, the way that you were reading that, the way I interpret that is there's a much more of an ability for individuals to sort of tune into the things that they find interesting, or that will, you know,
Yeah.
that is going to give them some kind of commonality with people that they share the same interests. You know what I mean? So it's like, okay, well, you know, now there's a radio station that, you know, does the Gaelic language and stuff like that. You know, it's like you can tap into the things that you're interested in and not have to be, uh, you know, you don't have to take cues necessarily from your local government or the people that are in authority. You know, you don't have to take information, is what I mean, from the people who are,
Yeah,
yeah.
it definitely creates a more decentralized culture,
Hmm.
in the sense that I don't think there were many sub there. I don't even know if there was anything as such as a subculture before the advent of television and radio.
Hmm.
Like
Yeah.
the freedom to switch channels or frequencies to watch something as that was more relatable to you, right? More to your liking.
Hmm.
I don't think that was there, and because that option was not there, there were more homogenization or more, uniformity in culture back in those times.
Right.
But after, and that's where you come back to the question of chaotic
Hmm.
situations in culture, right? All of these
Hmm.
new mediums
Hmm.
creating, like disrupting the uniformity of the culture.
Hmm.
Like it's like, like you might like Star Wars, I might
Hmm.
like, Star Trek or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah.
That like the right there, a separation exists where it should
Mhm.
not, right?
Yeah.
Because there's a rival brands,
Right.
and
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I also think it has led to, you know, the whole rise of cultural appropriation, or this frustration with cultural appropriation. You know, people,
yeah.
you know, they have access to videos of things that, you know, probably 10 years ago, you know, say we
Yeah,
would have never been able, you know, someone living in a rural part of America would have never been able to have access to something like, I don't know, I'm just thinking like, you know, the gamelan dance in Bali, right? There was this video going viral of this Dutch girl who's actually half Indonesian, but because she looked white, she was doing a, you know, the gamelan dance from Bali, you know, Indonesia. and they were basically saying that she's, you know, she's culturally appropriating, you know, the culture of the Balinese people because
Yeah,
she's a white girl trying to do a traditional dance, you know. And so that
right.
it's like, yeah, you know, even the things that we would,
Right.
yeah, you know, see as far
I mean,
flung.
even within subcultures, there are infighting, right? It's like
Hmm.
you have to, like, there's a subculture of some Bali dancing or whatever. You have to be certain ethnicity or something, and this other person says, "No, it's inclusive. You know, it doesn't
Yeah,
matter," and all of
right.
that.
Yeah.
So, like, again, coming back to what started this entire conversation. So you have all of these subcultures. You have all of these different, anime people, weeboos on one side, jazz enthusiasts on the other side, and so many of these different people. uh, I think what 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 a Christian society benefits is that you take the violence and aggression and the mob mentality, the aggressiveness of the mob away from all of that, so that there's a certain amount of healthy differentiation, right? A
Mhm,
healthy mimetic back and forth, no,
mhm,
which doesn't have to end like it. Just because you're a Star Wars fan and I'm a Star Trek fan doesn't mean we have to be on each other's neck all the time. Like,
right.
like I
Yeah.
say, like, yeah, Captain Spock sucks. No, you say like this sucks or whatever. They're insulting my character. So, like, we don't have to go into violence. We can still have a mimetic rivalry on a banter level, right?
Yeah.
On a healthy level.
Right.
So the reason why I have all of these migrants and all of these people is because they're coming from a non-Christian back
Mhm,
civilization,
mhm,
and they're coming from a civilization that doesn't teach them or prime them for a freedom that
mhm,
exists, where you can have your own different unique thoughts, or be dressed in a weird way and still
mhm,
walk the streets safely.
mhm,
So I would say, like, if there were subcultures in a non-Christian, uh, like for example, in Japan, let's say
mhm,
Japan is sort of like nowadays it's sort of Christian influenced, you might say, thanks to the American influence that has come in.
mhm,
So even though Japan has had that kind of influence, you will still see some pretty hardcore disciplinary measures that exist over there. For
mhm,
example, the difference between a Japanese baseball player and the training he goes through is night and day different from the major league player, right? In
mhm,
A Japanese baseball player is like he's subject to all kinds of abuse, and it's like he's going through a military boot camp when he
mhm,
trains. And
mhm.
you can watch, like, there's lots of content on the internet about this. It's very
Yeah, and they
fascinating.
have extremely stressful competitive
Yeah,
culture.
Yeah.
that's
The su-
because their culture that's because their culture has not been tempered by the Christian influence. You get what I'm saying? There's not, like, there's a lot of hostility, there's a lot of fighting back, and like players engage in, like, there was this one team, like I was watching a match between these two Japanese teams, and like this one team was getting obliterated, right? But they were just getting pummeled, like, and still they were expected to fight till the last breath. Even though they were suffering all kinds of injuries, they were bleeding from all over,
That's the
all
honor culture, right? The
honor culture.
being proud of your
Yeah.
ancestors. Yeah.
So you have a subculture, like a sports subculture over there, but you don't have the same extent of Christian, negating the Christianity, negating the violence, hostility from that
mhm.
difference between subcultures. So that's what a subculture looks like in a relatively pagan society
But
as opposed.
yeah, that's interesting that you say that though, because when you look at Japan, right, they have the appearance outwardly of being this very stoic, very passive aggressive, very honorable, You know what I mean? Like outward, like you are not supposed to show the way you really feel about somebody, right? Like for instance, somebody say, "Well, you know, our mother-in-law is coming over today." You know, you're supposed to, you're supposed to be like, "Oh, that's so great." You know, our
Right.
mother-in-law
If
is coming,
Well,
but
that's
one
how
that's
of the
not how
funniest
you
that's
really
ways.
how they
feel.
talk to. That's how they talk like that to outsiders, but not with when you're in the culture. It's a little bit more. I mean, they still put on the show, the honor
Mhm.
rituals, but there's a lot more, especially if you're an outsider in Japan living
Yeah.
there.
Mhm.
Like I know a person that his American, white, and he lives over there in Japan as a citizen for decades. But his kids were half Japanese, and they were not invited on the school float.
Mhm.
They were told you
Mhm.
are not going to be on our school float, when it's going down for the parade, because that was
Yeah.
considered to be,
They're
shame,
not Japanese.
yeah,
Yeah.
shameful, and you're not one of us, and you're
Mhm.
not to be on that float.
Mhm.
And
You're
but
not
at the
Japanese.
same time, when I was there, you look at something, you turn around, and they're buying it for you. Very kind, generous people to guests.
Mhm.
They want to really do their best to represent their people and their
Yeah.
family to an
Yeah.
outsider, so that the
Yeah.
outsider tells there's I get I don't
Mhm.
know to what extent, but I would imagine it's so that the outsider spreads the honor of that culture or family all over the world, like I just did,
Mhm.
talking about how great they were.
Mhm. How great the Yamato dynasty is.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah.
Regarding the subculture thing, there's a flip side to that coin as well when it comes to sports. Like if you see sports, like say, in the United States and Europe, especially among like in Europe among soccer fans, and the United States among college football fans or whatever, right? There's a lot of
Mhm.
hostility that's there as well.
Mhm.
So I would say that I don't know, like I'm just speculating. That's like I think people in the West see, or like at least in certain sections of the West, people see sports as a kind of carnivalistic thing where people are they come out of polite society and they're allowed to let loose,
Mhm.
by taunting the opposite or the opposition and all of that, especially among younger folk. Like
Mhm.
this is like in Europe, it's crazy. I mean, these hooligans, especially the British hooligans, they wreck the place wherever they go travel to,
Mhm.
especially if the team loses, and all of that.
Mhm.
So maybe that's like the opposite of like, I don't know, that maybe that's like them trying to take a feminist kind of approach where they're like, okay, this is the place where we keep the Christianity away and we
Mhm.
get back to our pagan roots, our
Mhm.
pagan Viking kind of mindset.
Yeah. Yeah. It does
So
have a.
I mean,
Yeah.
even in Christian societies you will still find these certain things, these certain places where it's more like a carnival thing, right? Where
Yeah.
you're supposed to freely engage in undifferentiation.
Yeah.
You are allowed to let loose, you're allowed to go crazy.
Yeah.
So yeah,
It's like the
thought.
Colosseum, like the red and green horse riders. You know, you champion your team. You know, the green team or the blue team or whatever. You know, it's the same thing in football. You know, or basketball or you know rugby, soccer. You know, it has the same tone. You know, the same. I mean, I imagine it gives you the same catharsis, right? Of backing your team, and you know, people argue as to whether that's healthy or not. You know, because it's like these. What is David? What do you call it? Like simulated warfare, or something
Ooh,
like that.
what?
Like
Football?
sports.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, you know, has the same, same catharsis that a Roman Colosseum would have had,
Well,
I
that's
have,
the question, isn't it? Like, how do we gain actual catharsis in our society?
Hmm.
Like,
through
sports,
discovery. I think through discovery
Hmm.
and
yeah,
creativity.
Hmm.
You
Yeah.
know, because when you create a new idea or a new song or a new story, it creates a generative act of something new that does not require violence to produce. It's the opposite of the scapegoat mechanism, because you extended mankind's understanding, which allows for new culture to be built without murdering or killing or expelling something to do it. So I think art is the solution to the scapegoat mechanism. I want to return. We talked in one of our recent things, Hiddens, called "The Wonder of the Joyful World." I don't remember if that was the title. I'm sorry, I'm not good with titles. I can't recall my titles, but um, we left with a story about this beautiful little parrot called N'kisi. So I thought we'd pick back up on this. This story of this little bird gives us a window into an example of the mystery of the world around us and how desire actually works. And we're only scratching the surface. This is by a guy named Rupert Sheldrake, who's a biologist, and the title of the book is called Dogs That Know When Their Owners Are Coming Home and Other Unexplained Powers of Animals. Rupert Sheldrake was a biologist. He is a biologist, but he says about parrots. He says some language using parrots respond to their people's moods, feelings, and intentions by making appropriate comments. In some cases, their ability seems to be telepathic. He talks about in 1997, the lady named Amy Morgana, an artist who lived in New York State, began training a young male African gray parrot named N'kisi in the use of language. She taught him as though he were a human child, starting when he was 5 months old. She used two techniques known as sentence frames and cognitive mapping. In sentence frames, she taught N'kisi words by repeating them in various sentences, such as, "Want some water? Look, I have some water." Cognitive mapping reinforced meanings that might not yet be fully understood. For example, if N'kisi said water, Amy would show him a glass of water. By March of 2010, when he was 12 years old, N'kisi's vocabulary had expanded to 1,500 words, the largest ever recorded for a parrot. He usually speaks in sentences. Although Amy's primary focus is on documenting N'kisi's use of language, she soon noticed that he said things that seemed to refer to her thoughts and intentions. He did the same with her husband, Hannah. After reading about my research on telepathy in animals, she emailed me summarizing some of her observations. Amy wrote, "N'kisi regularly comments when we are thinking about eating, going out, or taking a shower. Even if we are sitting quietly in another room and he sees no body language and hears no audio cues. At these times, he will say, for example, 'You want some yummy? You got to go out. See you later.' Or, 'You want to take a shower?'" Now he might be smelling them, that one we could be deductive, say maybe he smells somebody was a little bit stinky down the hallway.
yeah.
For more than 10 years, Amy had kept a detailed log of N'kisi's comments and noticed a number of seemingly telepathic incidents. Here are some examples. "I was thinking of calling Rob and picked up the phone to do so. N'kisi said, 'Hi, Rob,' as I had the phone in my hand and was moving toward the Rolodex to look up his number. We were watching the end credits of a Jackie Chan movie edited to a musical soundtrack. There was an image of him lying on his back on a girder way up on a tall skyscraper. It was scary due to the height. And N'kisi said, 'Don't fall down.' Then the movie cut to a commercial with a musical soundtrack. And as an image of a car appeared, N'kisi said, 'There's my car.' N'kisi's cage was at the other end of the room, behind the TV. He could not see the screen, and there were no sources of reflection. I was in a room on a different floor, but I could hear N'kisi. I was looking at a deck of cards with individual pictures and stopped at an image of a purple car. I was thinking it was an amazing shade of purple. Upstairs, he said at that instant, "Oh wow, look at that pretty purple." N'kisi also seemed to respond to dreams. He usually slept by Amy's bed. I was dreaming that I was working with the audio tape deck. N'kisi, sleeping by my head, said out loud, "You got to push the button," as I was doing exactly that in my dream. His speech woke me up. On another occasion, I was on the couch napping and I dreamed I was in the bathroom holding a brown medicine dropper. N'kisi woke me up by saying, "See, that's a bottle." I visited Amy and N'kisi in April 2000 and was impressed by their remarkable close relationship and by the way that N'kisi used language meaningfully. After hearing about so many remarkable incidents, I was, of course, interested to see for myself if he could really pick up Amy's thoughts. We did a simple test that replicated a situation in which N'kisi had appeared to demonstrate telepathy spontaneously. Amy and I went to another room where N'kisi could not see what we were doing, and I watched as Amy looked at several different images. When she concentrated on a picture of a girl, after several seconds, N'kisi said with unmistakable clarity, "That's a girl." N'kisi was in a different room, and Amy and I had not spoken about the image. Clearly, it was important to test this apparent telepathic communication in controlled experiments that could be analyzed statistically. Amy and I devised a procedure that was rigorously scientific and yet worked fairly naturally in N'kisi's familiar environment. Amy had noticed that N'kisi seemed to respond to moments of discovery. As she put it, N'kisi seemed to surf the leading edge of her consciousness. Therefore, methods that used repetitive images like card guessing were not likely to work. In order to preserve an element of surprise, we designed an experiment in which Amy opened sealed envelopes one at a time, each of which contained a different photograph. A man who was not otherwise involved in this research selected the photographs in accordance with the list of keywords in N'kisi's vocabulary. He sealed each photograph in a thick, opaque envelope, shuffled the envelopes, and numbered them in a random order. Neither Amy nor I knew which pictures he had selected, nor what order they were in. In each trial, Amy opened an envelope and looked at the picture for 2 minutes. Two synchronized cameras recorded Amy and N'kisi, who were in separate rooms on different floors of the house. They could not see each other, nor could N'kisi hear Amy. In any case, Amy said nothing, as confirmed by the audio track recorded by her camera. Subsequently, 3 separate people independently transcribed the tapes of N'kisi's comments. They did not know which pictures Amy had been looking at. The transcriptions were in good agreement with each other. They were then compared with the images Amy was looking at in the synchronized tapes. In many cases, N'kisi's comments corresponded to the image Amy was seeing. For example, when she was looking at a picture of flowers, he said, "That's a pic of flowers." When she was looking at a picture of someone talking on a mobile phone, he said, "What you doing on the phone?" and made a series of noises like a phone being dialed. When she was looking at a picture of 2 people on a beach wearing skimpy swimsuit, he said, "Look at my pretty naked body." N'kisi was right far more often than he would have been if he had simply been talking at random. In more technical terms, we considered it a hit when he said a predefined keyword that corresponded to an image representing that word. He scored 23 hits in a total of 71 trials. The results were analyzed independently by a professor of statistics at the Free University of Amsterdam, Holland. His statistical analysis showed that N'kisi's hits were far more frequent than would have been expected by chance, and his errors far fewer. The results were highly significant statistically. So I just think that's fascinating, don't you? That, these little observations on the edges of biological study that, is not being done by the big, huge universities.
Well, aside from the parrot sounding strangely like David Lynch there, do you think there is a telekinesis aspect to us, right? Like our
Yeah.
is like our we
Yeah.
can communicate.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on. Is my research is for years has been trying to connect this type of research to mimesis, what Rene Girard, right, says we catch desires, right? Well, it seems like this parrot is graphically catching the desires of his owner, that, you know, and he's able to express it with words that other animals aren't able to express. But dogs do a similar thing. Like this book talks about dogs that you can randomly this, like if you have a random job that lets you get off work at different times, and they measure it, that the moment the owner of the dog decides at work, all right, I'm done, and he puts up his stuff and leaves, the camera shows the dog immediately perk up at the home, you know, 30 miles away, and then goes to the door right when the car, you know, it is ready there, even if it's a 30-minute drive, whatever. It doesn't matter what time of the day. So it's not like, oh, it's always at 5 o'clock when he's done and the dog just knows to get up. No, it's 3 o'clock, 5 o'clock. You show up early, whatever. He's always perking up and getting by the door as soon as the owner gets into position psychologically to go home. His intention has been decided to go home. So there's something going on, you know, what Rupert Sheldrake calls this as morphic fields of biological memory, that people have this. He tries to explain it with his terms, but I think there's a physics dimension to it, and there's a mimesis dimension to it that all needs to be mapped out and developed. But I often wonder if some of that is why so many cultures like Japan and like cultures like India created a god for every little animal, you know, because I don't know, there was some kind of implicit understanding that there was a psychic field that we were sharing with them, that we were connected to them in ways that we didn't really understand and still don't understand. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean,
Often.
like I said, like in those times, philosophy, science, and religion were all, together.
Yeah.
They were not set. So if you wanted to see whether, like, what kind of scientific inventions those cultures had, then you would not be seeing those in separate scientific textbooks. You would be seeing that in their religious texts,
Mhm.
right? And in their mythological texts, like elemental transmutation, for example. Like there's texts of this person called Aryabhata in India who was trying to, or the text claims that he had succeeded in transmuting uh, one element into gold. Like he was making gold, he was creating gold from other elements back in those times. So it's not like this is recorded in a separate scientific book or whatever. It's like it's recorded as a story text, right? And all of that.
Mhm.
So yeah, like
Right. I mean, in today's age, though, like in the West, we would consider that to be sort of like quackery. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah,
for instance, I remember there was this guru, Indian guru, and you hear about a lot of Indian gurus coming from India to the United
yeah,
States. They become really big and famous. You guys remember that there was a series of books, that were written. I forget what they were called, but it was by an Indian guru. And then there was this other Indian guru. You talk about the gold, and I'm mentioning that because I remember there was a guy who claimed to like spit up gold nuggets out of his mouth, and he was giving them to
oh,
people.
that is quackery, because especially if you see an Indian guru, claiming to perform miracles in front of a is far too cultic audience.
Yeah,
Like there's no question that is that is quackery. But I'm
yeah,
talking about, like, things that are much more prior, right? Like, and it's not like this person was, like this person that I gave an example of. It's not like that he was striving for a huge audience or something, but it's like he was doing something in a remote part of the map or somewhere, right? Very secretive person or something. So, and because of that, there's not too many information about this person, unfortunately. So
Okay. Yeah.
there are these kinds of figures like Tesla like figures found in I mean even if you look to Japan, there's a episode like an example of a person who was trying to make a flying device way before the Wright brothers did, but he wasn't success like he was and he they said he was successful, but he was he was arrested and persecuted because he broke a lot of societal rules back in that time. Like this was it back from Japan from 18th 19th century, I guess. So that was like not the same Japan as nowadays, entirely different. Like they still had feudal lords and samurais and all of that over there.
Yeah. Yeah, it shows you that what I'm talking about, that the gospel is related to technological advancement, and they've always made these things, you always hear people say, well, no, they had all these amazing technologies in ancient Greece and all that. And then they go back to the megalithic structures, these, things from ancient society. But notice all of those things are in the service of death. They're in the service of a tomb for a king, or they're in the service of
Yeah.
a more elaborate way to murder somebody or to defend yourself from being murdered in, some kind of elaborate stone wall or something, temple. It's in the service of death. It's never in the service of like, hey, I figured out how to fly. It's like, was this help us kill people better? If not, we don't want to hear about it. That's that's the typical pattern. And I mean, the legend about Tesla, them taking all of his, his papers. I mean, who knows? I'm skeptical about some of this stuff, but it would fit along with that kind of pagan impulse that we only want stuff that can help us kill people better and help us control our oligarchic interests better, and that's the question. If Christians would get in the game and think critically and stop being either reactionary Luddites or just accepting the establishment line on everything, we could be doing a lot of fun things. Like, I want 20 more books about morphic field resonance as it pertains to animals and humans, because I think that has something to do with desire.
Yeah.
We talk about, the problem that I have with Girard's mimetic theory, and I'll leave it here, we got to go, but the problem I fundamentally have with is it just assumes a just so thing. Well, we're just hypermimetic. Why? Well, because it's just so. We're just mimetic, because, and it's okay. I mean, that gets us somewhere. He's a literary theorist. He wasn't a biologist. He wasn't a physicist. He wasn't anything like that. But I always want to know, well, why? I want to keep going with the why. I don't want to stop. Okay, that's just so. I'll take it. We're just mimetic. Okay, why are we mimetic? Why? What is the mechanism that drives us to be hyper attracted to copying and wanting to be and possess the being of our neighbor? What is all that? Instead of just making it just so. See, that is a problem with why mimetic theory, I think, will have a hurdle taking off to some degree if it's just left in a black box. Well, animals are mimetic somewhat, but humans are super mimetic, and we have a big brain, and that explains it. Oh, well, what's the sausage of that? What's the ingredients of that? I want to know why, because the more we pursue that, the more we'll understand why culture works the way it does. Because I think Girard has provided a very fascinating framework for the generation of culture, and the dangers of culture falling apart. Right. But I want to go further in understanding the forces that make that desire mechanism in human beings look the way it does.
Well,
I think but nobody wants to do it. No church wants to do it. I'm not trying to be cynical, but I mean, come on, let's be real. This is really different stuff, but it shouldn't be. This should be very mainstream. In a healthy society, this would be the kind of stuff people would be mainstream talking about. Sorry, you were saying something?
Yeah. Like you were talking about, like, nobody wants to ask why, why. And just reminded me of like this thing I read from Martin Luther, where one kid was asking him too many questions, and he started beating that kid as a punishment. But But I think like there's some like too many Christians, and I think too many Christians are, and this like I guess it relates to some in some ways to how Western people react to migrants a lot of the time. And I think there's a lot of rage bait content on the internet where they show you too many, let's say, non-white people engaging in fights, as if like white people don't engage in fights at all. Like, let's be real. Like, I'll show you some footage from Europe of these soccer hooligans tearing up the streets. Like, you'll have some pretty different opinions about white people too. But like, what I mean to say is like, if you like have a holistic approach like the Eastern people had used to have, like you won't really be having that kind. I think we'd be getting our answers to your whys very quickly, David. And for example, like this thing called, like, before the beginning of the world there was God, right? What was that like? Is God purely a psychological thing, or is God having some kind of a material existence, right? So if God created that world, like you were asking about what is the origin of mimesis, right? So if God created that world, that means that, and God created human beings in his own image, then that means that there would be some sort of magnetic push pull aspect of that inside God's being as well. Like, I'm not trying to be heretical here, but I'm just saying, like,
Yeah, that's
God
what.
did make us in our image.
Yeah, we've talked
And
about this for years, that there's a possibility of some type of material. I don't have a problem with the idea of some type of material being a part of God's being since the foundations, since his, for all eternity, because
the reason I
Christ
mentioned
is
that,
eternally
David,
begotten. Christ is eternally begotten. To me, that gives you an indicator that at least one member of the Trinity has some type of relationship to material being eternally. Now I know that gets into, a lot of people are scared to death of that concept because they want a Gnostic. I don't know. I don't want to
well,
say
that's
they're
like a
Gnostic, but it feels like it sometimes.
there's like the reason I mentioned this is because when Eastern people like the Japanese and Buddhists, when they say that the world has always existed, it might mean we did need not react mimetically to that, right? As if like, oh no, you don't believe the thing, you don't believe the creed, you reject this part of the creed, now you're exclusive from us. We don't need to react like that, but rather like ask them, what does that mean exactly? The world has always existed, because they may be on to something.
Mm-hmm.
Like, if God is there prior to the creation of this world, and if everything in the natural world is I mean, certainly to an extent has something like has God as the source of all things, right? Like in the and the Orthodox Church is pretty adamant that the Father is source of, is like the soul, like filioque thing, right? So like it's like, if God is the source of all these things, then that means there is a push pull. I don't know, like maybe there is like God is like, I certainly believe in that God has a alluring part to him, right? That God attracts you by his beauty, by his glory and all of that, right? By his, and that's why, David, you think that we should be fascinated, we should be awed by Christianity, because God has that aspect, and that's why we are here together and we are talking endlessly about him, is because it's a fascinating subject and God is fascinating. And
Yeah.
but what we Christians in I mean, not only in the West, I don't want to scapegoat the Western churches, it's in the East as well. So like we tend to, box him into a category and, lock him away so that nobody is fascinated by him anymore.
Yeah.
And they say like, they're fearful of us running amok in our fascination, right? Like, we'd be too much, crazy if we get fascinated. But I think that's much to the church's detriment, because it has certainly stifled creativity and innovations.
Yeah.
and our own knowledge in God.
Yeah. I'll just say, I'll say this. I think, looking at it from a from Gerard's perspective, I remember talking to this political anthropology, professor, Dr. Sarkozy, and he talked about how, Girard's ideas really explain or are able to uncover what took place after the fall, right? Or the fall of man. It maybe it's not a good explanation to what happened before. You know what I'm saying? Like, it can't explain what happens after the garden. I mean, what happens before before the banishment from the garden, but it can explain the mimesis and everything that was carried out after the fall. So
I
yeah.
I don't think mimesis is the result of the fall. I
Mm,
think there is a perverted form of mimesis as a result of the fall.
mm.
You get what I'm
Yeah, yeah.
saying?
I mean, well,
So
that's yeah. Okay, that's what I'm. Yeah,
so
that's what.
like I said before, like I believe that there is an attractiveness to God. So
Mm,
that's the pull, that's God, that's the attractive part of mimesis, right?
mm,
Like mimesis is back and forth, right?
mm,
So
mm,
we have a tendency to associate mimesis with rivalries,
mm,
but mimesis is not so not only inherent in rivalries.
mm,
Mimesis is also much to do with let's say a marriage relationship
mm.
or a romantic relationship, right? A
Yeah.
romantic relationship is not a rivalry, although it
Mm,
tends to become that in these days, but it's
mm.
not inherently like that.
Yeah.
So that's all pointing towards the way that God operates within the
Mm,
Trinity, right? The Trinity is said as a dance, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. Like the early church fathers and C.S. Lewis thought that was a divine dance. Like
mm,
they had a Greek word for it, perichoresis,
mm,
right? It was like they're always dancing with one another. It's like
mm,
everlasting dance.
mm,
Like there's
mm.
always like energy and all of that springing forth from the between the three persons. So
Yeah.
that's not them, like people do in a mosh pit, like right, like push each other away.
Mm.
That's not them doing that. Rather, that's them mutually complementing and
And
glorifying
we're
one
made in the
another. In
image of
other words,
that, and we're made in the image of that structure, which is Trinitarian. Every
Mhm.
human
yes,
being comes from a mother and father, and the child is required for the human species to exist. That's the three part:
Yeah. Yeah.
mother,
yeah.
father,
I mean,
and child.
yeah. But there has to be an explanation for why things actually went in the wrong direction, right? When you're talking about that union and that constant dance, right? That all the things that you're explaining sounds like it's what's supposed to be, right? What should be, what ought to be.
Mhm.
And so I'm saying that I
Was
think
supposed to be in humanity.
no, just like you're talking about mimesis, right? So there's like you can have positive mimesis, you can have that positive mimesis mirror what the Trinity is supposed to look like, right? What things probably would have looked like before the fall, right? But you need an explanation for why those things went sour, like how they glitched, you know, what what was thrown in there to cause that good mimesis or that positive, relationship to actually turn in on itself. Does
Well,
that make sense
because
what I'm
we
saying?
the fall, like if you look at it that way, the fall can be looked at as a kind of rejection of the dance, right?
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
Satan comes into the garden and says you don't have to engage in the dance because you can become like God,
Hmm.
right? So that
Hmm.
in order to participate in a dance, there needs to be difference of personhood, right?
Hmm.
God, the Father is not the Son is not the
The
Holy
fall
Spirit.
is
There's no.
the fall is the consumption of the difference,
Yes, and this is what the crazy leftists don't
consuming the difference,
understand.
eating the difference
The-
instead of respecting the difference.
Hmm.
yeah,
That
this
makes
is
sense.
what these crazy leftists they don't understand is that you cannot have a diversity without the very thing that makes us all diverse.
Hmm.
You know, Like, I am not you, Shannon. I am not a black guy. You are not an Indian. And David is not either, right? We are all three of us are uniquely, like the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, as it is in the divine Godhead. Humanity reflects that by our various races and various gender, not various, like two genders and all that. So like the humanity reflects that diversity, like in our own way, like it reflects that diversity found in the Godhead, the triune Godhead. So like Satan came in and said that we don't need to be diverse anymore, and like we can invade the dance by invading the throne of God, like becoming as God is.
Yeah.
So like we can, like, this is the thing, like from the Edenic perspective, God actually invites humanity into the dance so that we too are glorified by partaking in his nature, right?
Yeah.
But we are separated from that dance. We are separated from that dance because we covet, from a mimetic point of view, we covet the being of God, right? We covet the divinity of God. And that's where I guess you sort of answers your questions, like where did we get the negative mimesis, the rivalrous aspect of mimesis, right? Where do we get that tendency towards violence with one another? It's because the fall has told us to reject cohesion and harmony and and the dance, and now we are always pushing each other away.
Yeah, so here's a concept, that I think what's here is that, if you're thinking about the trickster, right? The concept of the trickster God, right? Like dropping something into the scene that would create chaos and confusion, right? And I think that this is something that, in anthropology, if you look at the trickster, it's always around in anthropology, right? So like Maui, you guys know the story of Maui, the Disney movie, right? Was made about it. He's a trickster god, right? Prometheus, he steals the fire from heaven and he gives it to mankind. He's like a trickster demigod, right? So to me, like when I read the garden story, I think, the devil is playing sort of a trickster character, right? He's saying, okay, God tells you to do this, but you can look how much knowledge you gain, if you just, if you just eat this fruit, you know what I mean? It'll open up everything. And I think
Yeah.
what the I think that is the way the negative mimesis actually entered into the world, is
The
through
shortcut.
some through some sort of trickster character, and so Jesus, in other words, has to come to reverse that, to give us a true understanding of God, right? And to not act as one of the trickster gods, to not act like Prometheus, right? To not steal fire from heaven, to not be like Anansi, stealing the gifts from heaven, but to have a cooperative relationship with God, his Father, right?
Yeah.
Not be the trickster stealing from God to service to help mankind, but working with God, right? To uncover, and reveal sort of the broken covenant that was made originally, right? Does that make sense what I'm saying? I don't know, man.
So I think like what you're saying, Shannon, is very, it's all, I think it's identical to what I'm proposing. It's just that I'm proposing it from a very C.S. Lewis kind of perspective, like the dance and everything. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like that what you just said is like reject cooperation with God, right? Or reject the dance, the divine dance. Both are, in my opinion, both are the same thing.
Yeah.
So going
That,
your own
that
way, follow your own
the
bliss.
fall is not being grateful for what you have and coveting the other's difference. Okay.
Yeah. No, I believe that.
Yeah.
I just think it's also, it's interesting to think about how that slipped into the, you know what I mean, the whole, how that whole thing spiraled
Because
toward
well, that's one of the things that I'm working on, is that like when you look at the physics, I believe there's a physics dynamic to mimetic mimesis,
Mhm.
but it's not a deterministic thing. And there's some weird subjective part of this that the free will mind has the ability to perceive things in a way that creates problems, right? You know, it's their perception that they choose to have, which determines the outcome of the interaction, you know? So that's the radical freedom of being made in the image of God, is that we have that level of volition to be able to determine what we perceive things to be. Like some people, you know, they have a situation where they have so many blessings and they're not happy, right? That's their perception of that, which then creates the opportunity for the negative mimetic behavior to be transmitted to those around them. They choose to be not happy. That's their perception. They choose to.
They're spreading that to other people, like they're passing that negativity on to
and
others.
that's the thing. And then there's a physics dynamic to this that's not deterministic, because, you know, from a physics standpoint, you are attracted to that which seems to be the opposite polar charge. So positive is attracted to negative. That's why males and females are attracted to one another, right? It's like batteries, positive and minus on a battery. And, you know, you can see that reflected that way. You can also see it reflected in every thought. So you say, you know, for example, a human wakes up and says, I'm poor and I don't have a good job. They throw on the social media and they see someone who looks wealthier than them, who has a better job than them. From their perception, right? Their perception, their magnetic field is that that's different. That's opposite of what I have, what I am. I am in a state of poorness and dissatisfaction, not realizing my potential. This person's life that I see demonstrated to me on video or image represents the opposite of what I am. And I'm attracted to that, right? And so you get drawn towards it. Let's say you meet that person in real life, you become friends. Then you find out all their flaws. You find out they're not as friendly and happy-go-lucky as you thought. They don't have all the things that you thought, you know, would make you happy. The more you imitate them, you get the same job they do. You're making the same money they do. Somehow you're not happy. The more you're close together, you start friction. And that's the repulsion, because you look similar. Now you like your subjective perception is that they are same. Subconscious feeling repels you, because when you put two magnets that are positive together, they're going to push away. And that feeling of being pushed away is the psychological experience of negative mimetic rivalry. That push, that irritating, that irritation, that yuck, I'm repelled by you. But in the repulsion, in the local moment of a magnet being repelled, right? When it pushes back, there's a magnetic opportunity for the poles to realign and for attraction to come back. And so in repelling, that moment opens up the opportunity for attraction again, which you come back in. So that looks like a couple's having a problem, and the husband goes on a work trip for 2 weeks, and that distance draws their attention back to one another. They can't stop texting each other. And when they see each other again, they're attracted again. So that's the opposite of being too close together and creating negative mimetic rivalry by choosing to. You don't have to, because one flesh could be a non-violent, non-rivalrous situation if we choose to make it that way. But we subjectively tend to fall into negative perceptions of that oneness, that sameness, which creates repulsion. And then that repulsion will tend to drift a little bit of distance, either spatially or psychologically or something, which then allows for the poles to realign back into an attractive state. So you're gone for 2 weeks or whatever in this scenario. You come back, all of a sudden attraction. And then you have to learn the art of the Trinitarian dance, is learning how to keep the attractive experience of positive mimesis going despite the subjective experience of more and more sameness. That's the mystery of reality. In a nutshell, as best as I can figure it out so far. That's what that's the mystery of the Christian reality, you know? Which that's like what we're exactly about, unfortunately. I mean, it is, but it doesn't quite look like that. What'd you say?
Yeah, I mean, I wholeheartedly agree with that. That sounds so much fascinating.
I'm just using physics, but physics that has not been developed yet in terms of the public's awareness. I've been talking about it for years. Dr. Yu's got a book on it, you know, but that's coming out. But the thing is that, you know, all of this is a physical explanation for the sociological phenomenon that Girard has already discovered on that layer. And I think Rupert Sheldrake is honing in on something on a biological layer, and it needs to all be integrated, which is the work that I'm doing. So trying to integrate the physics, the biology, and then the social sciences.
I mean, reality is that it's already integrated.
Yeah.
So it's only in our minds that we separate all of these things.
Right. Well, that's what I'm trying. That's the whole purpose of knowledge and discovery, is being able to allow the right hemisphere to properly control the left hemisphere, which wants to separate everything. The left hemisphere wants to separate and grasp, and the concept of grasping is containing and separating it away from the rest of the bananas on the tree. That grabbing and pulling is the left hemisphere specialty. The right hemisphere brings everything together, but the right hemisphere does not control language as much as left hemisphere brain does. So the right hemisphere speaks in different ways. It speaks in a subtle, unconscious way. And what you have to be able to do is tap back into that right hemisphere way of thinking and integrate left, because it's not about hating the left. It's about integrating that left hemisphere back with the right hemisphere dominating the way in which it sees things. And if we do that, we'll realize that these things are much more fascinating than we thought. And we are like little magnets. And you know, what's interesting is folk wisdom talks about magnetism. If you type in human magnetism right now, you'll see all kinds of folk kind of goofy woo-woo stuff. Usually it's described as new age, but it's not just that. People talk about animal magnetism. This guy has animal magnetism. This woman has raw animal magnetism, so attractive to everybody they walk around. Everybody is irresistible about them, you know, or that they talk about on a base level. They talk about magnetic desire, and they talk about magnetism in terms of like your thoughts have their own frequency and that kind of thing. All these things are like folk intuitions about this thing I'm describing, but it needs to be properly put together in a way that our brains can receive it, you know, because we don't right now. That folk wisdom stuff is goofy and goofy, and it goes everywhere, and people say mantras all day long. I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, I'm a millionaire, and it magically makes it. It's kind of woo-woo and magic, right? It's not really fully developed. It's just magic intuitions, but there's something true there in underneath all the goofiness, exaggerations, that needs to be integrated with what morphic fields are talking about, with parrots knowing what you're thinking, and animals knowing what you're thinking, humans knowing what you're thinking. And then also tying that back into mimesis, where you talk about like, okay, well, why do we get into conflict? What's happening with the scapegoat mechanism? You know, I think it's interesting that, you know, you talk about bad blood in a community needing to be discharged on a scapegoat. That is a psychological and physical phenomenon. I think physics, if all thoughts are a frequency, and you start creating a frequency of vibration within a community, that we're all angry at one another, that needs to be discharged somewhere in terms of turning that anger collectively against one person. There's a physical relief phenomenon that people experience on a physics level when they're searching for a scapegoat to destroy, in my opinion, you know? But again, all this stuff needs time and work to develop. But I think we've done enough of that today in sketching some of these things.
Yeah.
That's okay, bro. You know what I mean? So you know, it's better than most of what's out there now, right?
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. I think this discussion is much more fascinating than anything that's going on out there. Right?
Yeah.
You don't think you don't think they're talking about this on the whatever podcast today, sir? Or Fresh and Fit?
Well,
Hey, take their name out of this. We don't want their algorithm looking smashing them together. Look, you talk about scapegoating. Get this
scapegoat within a scapegoat within a scapegoat. That's what
we won't have no jobs no more, bro. You take your name out of it.
I mean, that's the thing, bro. It's like the algorithm. You talked about the algorithm, Shannon. The algorithm rewards people who puts out nasty
Drama.
violent stuff, drama stuff, and
You
all of
notice how
that.
the algorithm is now talked about like it's a god with these little secret priests that know about all the little tricks.
Yeah,
Like,
the
it's all
algorithm goes.
you know, who controls the
Yeah.
algorithm? What's the
Yeah.
secret ingredient? Who's on
Yeah.
the naughty list? What words? How do they do it? How do they shadow
Right.
ban? How do they attack? How do they boost your views and then drop your views? And you know, it's like
Right.
these little priestly secret priests that are all
Yeah.
you know summoning this deity that determines everybody's fate in the digital world. And I think
Yeah.
that's totally ridiculous.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the whole thing is total waste of
Well,
time.
it's just a natural consequence of what human beings have developed to be, right? Like this just gels in wonderfully with our, like what David you said about the fall causing our magnetism to go off balance,
Yeah.
right? And that's why we are always like we have to work so hard to develop an attractiveness, positive mimesis, impulse. So, whoever the elite algorithm gods are, they're going to be human just like us. So if somebody throws them off and new person comes in, he's going to do the same thing, right?
Yeah.
Is because that person has not tapped into the same kind of knowledge that we are just seeing right now with the whole physics and mimetics component of it all. So that's the secret. I think that's the key. That's the giant key, and
Right.
we refuse to like exploring the physics component of theology or whatever you might want to call it, the mimesis, the physics component of it.
Yeah.
Like I think Girard just gave us a clue. He just showed us to the door. Now it's our job to step inside and see what's on the other end. I think we've just started to do that, and it's it's like I'm pretty excited, to see what's on the other end.
Yeah.
Girard was just a primer, if you see what I mean.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, the closest he got to an explanation for mimesis was the mirror neurons, but mirror neurons.
Which
Yeah.
which Dr. Ugulian has sort of
But
championed,
see
right?
here, it goes further than that because now we know that the human tissues has magnetic, what we call magnetite nanoparticles in all of it. You know, that's something they've just discovered.
Mhm.
Magnetite is a highly magnetic crystal that's found in the brains of, say, birds and how they know how to follow the patterns of the magnetic fields of the earth and their flock patterns, their
Mhm.
migratory patterns. Those same
Mhm.
magnetic particle nanocrystals are in human being tissue. There's your mimesis right there. I've been working on this stuff for years. I really don't want to say all this stuff on air because I don't have all of this put together. I've been working on this since the first thing when I met Dr. Yu in 2015, I believe it was 2015. First time I saw him speak, I turned to somebody next to me and I said, now I have a physical understanding for mimesis. When I heard his theory explained, he didn't even talk about the social phenomenon, but when he said everything is a magnetic particle and all of our bodies are made up of nothing but magnetic particles with a magnetic field, attraction, repulsion is the fundamental of every particle. The first thing, it was like a lightning bolt. I mean, it was like, it just hit me. I was like, I said, that's my physical explanation for mimetic desire. As soon as
I mean,
and this entire
it's
time since 2015, with our program on camera and what we've been doing behind the scenes, I've been developing that slowly, methodically, not as fast as I should, but I've been because it's such an audacious thing. I want to go slow. You know what I mean? And I want to really learn what I'm doing while I'm doing it before I start talking about it too much in the public. But that's the thing that was like a light bulb.
I mean, Christians teach that God is everywhere, right?
Yeah.
What they call omniscient,
Omniscience,
Omnipresence.
omnipresence.
omnipresence, right?
Mhm.
Just think about what that looks like from a physics point of view,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? We think that God is some kind of we think
Yeah.
that God is like a surveillance state, but
Mhm.
it's not really like that. It's greater than that. And the surveillance state that we have is a perversion of that because we don't know what omnipresence
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
It's not God looking like Sauron on us, you know.
That's all
I
right.
mean, Dr. Yu says that consciousness is simply magnetic
Yes.
force, which, see, again, a Christian would be traditionally terrified of that because they've accepted a Cartesian dualistic framework by which body and matter can't touch soul. But if you don't have that, if you have a Christian framework in which body and soul are enmeshed together in this weird mystery, that is what allows us to start, wow, well, maybe his model is actually much closer to the truth, which is that what we perceive of consciousness has a physics component to it in the form of magnetic attraction and a magnetic field, right?
Yeah.
Every thought, you know, that feeling you get, the gut feeling, the sixth sense you feel, that's a magnetic field. And we don't understand it because our traditional model of the human body has been a mechanistic model that does not account for properly understanding the energy component or whatever we would explain those words and other traditions to be. That is missing from the dead mechanistic model of human biology and human, you know, sciences.
It's because, it's like you said, we got too much Hellenism in the church.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Yeah.
No, not. I'm not getting on nobody who is Hellenistic. I'm just saying.
Yeah, a bunch of hellions, huh? All right, I'll let you go, guys. Thank you for your time.
All right, man.
All right. Take care.
Take care.